This is Wabi-Sabi for artists, designers, poets, and philosophers. Written by Leonard Koren and narrated by Richy. This edition is issued by contractual arrangement with Imperfect Publishing. Originally published as a paperback book. Copyright 1994 and 2008 by Leonard Koren. Note: the paper edition of this book has black and white photographs interspersed throughout the text. The photographs serve to communicate a sense of what Wabi-Sabi looks like. In this audiobook, the aforementioned photographs will be described in the order that they appear, but at the end of every chapter. Bear in mind that the visual qualities of Wabi-Sabi described are not what one conventionally thinks of as gorgeous or pretty, but they are beautiful in a quiet, unconventional Wabi-Sabi manner. Introduction. Wabi-Sabi is a beauty of things imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. It is a beauty of things modest and humble. It is a beauty of things unconventional. The extinction of a beauty. The immediate catalyst for this book was a widely publicized tea event in Japan. The Japanese aesthetic of Wabi-Sabi has long been associated with the tea ceremony, and this event promised to be a profound Wabi-Sabi experience. Hiroshi Teshigahara, the hereditary Iamoto Grand Master of the Sogetsu School of Flower Arranging, had commissioned 3 of Japan's most famous and fashionable architects to design and build their conceptions of ceremonial tea-drinking environments. Teshigahara, in addition, would provide a 4th design. Besides an outdoor bamboo environment by Teshigahara, the other tea-drinking structures were designed by Tadao Ando, Arata Isozaki, and Kiyonori Kikutake. The event was called the Great Numazu Tea Event, an explicit allusion to the big tea gathering at Kitano Shrine of October 1587, the largest-scale tea event ever held in Japan. The warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi, having just conquered the southern island of Kyushu, issued a proclamation commanding all practitioners of tea, rich and poor alike, to attend his event at Kitano Shrine in Kyoto. Some 800 tea huts filled the pine groves on the shrine grounds. After a 3-plus-hour train and bus ride from my office in Tokyo, I arrived at the event site, the grounds of an old imperial summer residence. To my dismay, I found a celebration of gorgeousness, grandeur, and elegant play, but hardly a trace of Wabi-Sabi. One slick tea hut, ostensibly made of paper, looked and smelled like a big white plastic umbrella. Adjacent was a structure made of glass, steel, and wood that had all the intimacy of a high-rise office building. The one tea house that approached the Wabi-Sabi qualities I had anticipated, upon closer inspection, was fussed up with gratuitous postmodern appendages. It suddenly dawned on me that Wabi-Sabi, once the preeminent high-culture Japanese aesthetic and the acknowledged centerpiece of tea, had become an endangered species. Throughout this book, the term aesthetic refers to a set of informing values and principles, guidelines, for making artistic discriminations and decisions. The hallmarks of an aesthetic are 1. Distinctiveness, distinction from the mass of ordinary, chaotic, non-differentiated perceptions. 2. Clarity. The aesthetic point has to be definite, clear, even if the aesthetic is about unclearness. And 3. Repetition, continuity. Admittedly, the beauty of Wabi-Sabi is not to everyone's liking, but I believe it is in everyone's interest to prevent Wabi-Sabi from disappearing altogether. Diversity of the cultural ecology is a desirable state of affairs, especially in opposition to the accelerating trend toward the uniform digitalization of all sensory experience, wherein an electronic reader stands between experience and observation, and all manifestation is encoded identically. In Japan, however, unlike Europe and to a lesser extent America, precious little material culture has been saved. So in Japan, saving a universe of beauty from extinction means, at this late date, not merely preserving particular objects or buildings, but keeping a fragile aesthetic ideology alive in any form of expression available. Since Wabi-Sabi is not easily reducible to formulas or catchphrases without destroying its essence, saving it becomes a daunting task indeed. Idealistic beauty. Like many of my contemporaries, I first learned of Wabi-Sabi during my youthful spiritual quest in the late 1960s. At that time, the traditional culture of Japan beckoned with profound answers to life's toughest questions. Wabi-Sabi seemed to me a nature-based aesthetic paradigm that restored a measure of sanity and proportion to the art of living. Wabi-Sabi resolved my artistic dilemma about how to create beautiful things without getting caught up in the dispiriting materialism that usually surrounds such creative acts. Wabi-Sabi, deep, multidimensional, elusive, appeared the perfect antidote to the pervasively slick, saccharine corporate style of beauty that I felt was desensitizing American society. I have since come to believe that Wabi-Sabi is related to many of the more emphatic anti-aesthetics that invariably spring from the young modern creative soul, beat, punk, grunge, or whatever it's called next. The Book of Tea Redux. I first read about Wabi-Sabi in Kakuzo, also known as Tenshin, Okakura's enduring The Book of Tea, which had been published in 1906. Although Okakura touched on many aspects of Wabi-Sabi, he avoided using the term Wabi-Sabi. He probably didn't want to confuse his readers with foreign words that were not absolutely essential to his discussion of aesthetic and cultural ideas. The book was written in English for a non-Japanese audience. He may also have avoided explicit mention of Wabi-Sabi because the concept is so full of thorny issues for the Japanese intellectual. Almost a century after Okakura's book, however, the term Wabi-Sabi makes a perfunctory appearance in practically every book and magazine article that discusses the tea ceremony or other arcane things Japanese. Oddly enough, the 2 or 3 sentences used in these publications to describe Wabi-Sabi, the phrases at the beginning of this introduction, are almost always the same, and the term is also used as a derisive shorthand by foreign and domestic critics to put down the sort of prissy dilettantism practiced by some devotees of Japan's traditional arts. Perhaps now is an auspicious cultural moment to get beyond the standard definitions, to dive a little more deeply into the murky depths. In this spirit, I have searched for the various pieces of Wabi-Sabi, tarnished, fragmented, and in disrepair, though they may be, and have attempted to put them together into a meaningful system. I've gone as far as the orthodox Wabi-Sabi commentators, historians, and cultural authorities have ventured, and then I've taken a few steps further. Reading between the lines, matching intention to actuality, I have attempted to grasp the totality, the holism of Wabi-Sabi, and make some sense of it. Heretofore, Wabi-Sabi has had no formal, systematic structure. Is the approach of this book intellectually legitimate? Sen no Rikyu, the highest Wabi-Sabi authority, according to orthodox scholars, is alleged to have said that one grasps the purest essence of a rule or concept by understanding its totality. Then, if one desires, the derivative forms may be modified to meet current needs. In a sense, that is what the author of this book is doing here with Wabi-Sabi. The result is thus a tentative, personal first step towards saving what once constituted a comprehensive and clearly recognizable aesthetic universe. Photographs from the introduction. The book's first photograph is a detail of the facade of a stylish boutique in the trendy Daikanyama district of Tokyo. The facade is composed of driftwood, recycled corrugated metal, and rough plaster. Wabi-Sabi can be expressed in a contemporary setting with the feeling of lightness and even a bit of humor. A leaf decomposes on the ground on a Tokyo sidewalk. It is autumn, and leaves in every phase of decomposition abound on the walkways of every Japanese town and city. If you walk the same route on a regular basis, and you're particularly attentive, you may notice how the leaves slowly journey on their way to nothingness. A section of unpainted wood siding on the exterior of a single-family house. The effects of the sun, wind, and rain, day in and day out for years, have brought the knots, scratches, accidental markings, and grain structure into sharp relief. Buildings with this sort of wood siding still can be found in Japan today, though they are disappearing at a rapid rate. A history of obfuscation. When asked what Wabi-Sabi is, most Japanese will shake their head, hesitate, and offer a few apologetic words about how difficult it is to explain. Although almost every Japanese will claim to understand the feeling of Wabi-Sabi, it is, after all, supposed to be one of the core concepts of Japanese culture. Very few can articulate this feeling. Why is this? Is it because, as some Japan chauvinists suggest, one needs the right genetic predisposition? Hardly. Is it because the Japanese language, or the conventions of its use, is good for communicating subtleties of mood, vagueness, and the logic of the heart, but not so good for explaining things in a rational way? In small part, perhaps. But the main reason is that most Japanese never learned about Wabi-Sabi in intellectual terms. since there are no books or teachers to learn it from. This is not by accident. Throughout history, a rational understanding of Wabi-Sabi has been intentionally thwarted. Zen Buddhism. Almost since its inception as a distinct aesthetic mode, Wabi-Sabi has been peripherally associated with Zen Buddhism. In many ways, Wabi-Sabi could even be called the Zen of things, as it exemplifies many of Zen's core spiritual philosophical tenets. Zen Buddhism originated in India and subsequently traveled to China in the 6th century AD, where it developed further. It was first introduced into Japan around the 12th century. Zen stresses direct, intuitive insight into transcendental truth beyond all intellectual conception. At the core of both Wabi-Sabi and Zen is the importance of transcending conventional ways of looking and thinking about things or existence. Nothingness occupies the central position in Wabi-Sabi metaphysics, just as it does in Zen. The first Japanese people involved with Wabi-Sabi, tea masters, priests, and monks, had all practiced Zen and were steeped in the Zen mindset. One of the major themes of Zen is strident anti-rationalism. Essential knowledge in Zen doctrine can be transmitted only from mind to mind, not through the written or spoken word. Those who know don't say. Those who say don't know. On a pragmatic level, this precept is designed to reduce the misinterpretation of easily misunderstood concepts. As a consequence, a clear, expository definition of Wabi-Sabi has, for all intents and purposes, been studiously avoided. The Iamoto System. Since the 18th century, the organization and merchandising of cultural information in Japan about arts, such as tea ceremony, flower arranging, calligraphy, song, and dance, have been franchised out by what are essentially groups of family businesses. The chief family member in each group is called the Iamoto. Every Iamoto-style business in Japan is organized in a pyramidal structure, with the Iamoto at the top. A part of each payment that every student makes to his or her personal teacher for art instruction is kicked up the pyramidal ladder so that the Iamoto, the hereditary leader, usually the eldest son, gets a cut. Today, many of the Iamoto families are enormously wealthy and have diversified their businesses into areas far removed from the strictly cultural. Primary text sources, artifacts, and other materials needed for scholarly research are often controlled by Iamoto families, who, as in Zen Buddhism, insist that such essential information be shared only with those of their choosing. The concept of Wabi-Sabi, a vital part of Iamoto proprietary intellectual property, particularly in the world of tea, was not to be elucidated, given away, unless in exchange for money or favors. Artfully obscured exotic concepts like Wabi-Sabi also made good marketing bait. Obscuring the meaning of Wabi-Sabi, but tantalizing the consumer with glimpses of its value, was the most effective means of Iamoto-style entrepreneurism. Aesthetic obscurantism. Most revealing about the meaning of Wabi-Sabi is the fostering of the myth of inscrutability for aesthetic reasons. Some Japanese critics feel that Wabi-Sabi needs to maintain its mysterious and elusive, hard-to-define qualities because ineffability is part of its specialness. Wabi-Sabi is, they believe, a teleological benchmark, an end in itself that can never be fully realized. From this vantage point, missing or indefinable knowledge is simply another aspect of Wabi-Sabi's inherent incompleteness. Since ideological clarity or transparency is not an essential aspect of Wabi-Sabi, to fully explain the concept might in fact diminish it. Maybe these critics are correct. In the realm of aesthetics, reason is almost always subordinate to perception. Japanese sword makers and appraisers have traditionally talked about the aura-enshrouded soul of a blade in only the vaguest, most mystical terms. Nowadays, however, younger sword makers have studied and become quite clinical about the exact furnace temperatures, metal-chemical admixtures, and moment when the nature, the flexibility, rigidity, hardness, etc., or soul of the blade is actually created. Perhaps this newfound candor deromanticizes something better left to the imagination. Yet, if the ability to create the aesthetic is to be preserved, some guideposts need to be placed for future generations. Photograph from this chapter. Odd, interestingly shaped ceramic vessels by the Japanese artist Kazuhiko Miwa. Clay, which is essentially baked earth, is an especially eloquent medium for expressing wabi-sabiness. A provisional definition. Wabi-sabi is the most conspicuous and characteristic feature of what we think of as traditional Japanese beauty. It occupies roughly the same position in the Japanese pantheon of aesthetic values as do the Greek ideals of beauty and perfection in the West. Polarizing the world into East and West is a convenient communication shorthand, like using the names of famous people, events, and things as symbols of culturally agreed upon generalizations. Particular caution should be exercised when characterizing Japan as Eastern. Especially since World War II, Western ideas and values have increasingly become Japanese ideas and values, resulting in the gradual supplanting of Japanese aesthetic concepts by those from America and Europe. Wabi-sabi can in its fullest expression be a way of life. At the very least, it is a particular type of beauty. The closest English word to wabi-sabi is probably rustic. Webster's defines rustic as simple, artless, or unsophisticated, with surfaces rough or irregular. While rustic represents only a limited dimension of the wabi-sabi aesthetic, it is the initial impression many people have when they first see a wabi-sabi expression. Wabi-sabi does share some characteristics with what we commonly call primitive art, that is, objects that are earthy, simple, unpretentious, and fashioned out of natural materials. Unlike primitive art, though, wabi-sabi almost never is used representationally or symbolically. Originally, the Japanese words wabi and sabi had quite different meanings. Sabi originally meant chill, lean, or withered. Wabi originally meant the misery of living alone in nature, away from society, and suggested a discouraged, dispirited, cheerless, emotional state. Around the 14th century, the meaning of both words began to evolve in the direction of more positive aesthetic values. The self-imposed isolation and voluntary poverty of the hermit and ascetic came to be considered opportunities for spiritual richness. For the poetically inclined, this kind of life fostered an appreciation of the minor details of everyday life and insights into the beauty of the inconspicuous and overlooked aspects of nature. In turn, unprepossessing simplicity took on new meaning as the basis for a new, pure beauty. Over the intervening centuries, the meanings of wabi and sabi have crossed over so much that today the line separating them is very blurry indeed. When Japanese today say wabi, they also mean sabi, and vice versa. Most often, people simply say Wabi-Sabi, the convention adopted for this book. But if we were to consider wabi and sabi as separate entities, we could characterize their differences as follows. Wabi refers to a way of life, a spiritual path. Sabi refers to material objects, art, and literature. Wabi refers to the inward, the subjective. Sabi refers to the outward, the objective. Wabi refers to a philosophical construct. Sabi refers to an aesthetic ideal. Wabi refers to spatial events. Sabi refers to temporal events. Photograph from this chapter. The residue around a common welding joint that binds two pieces of iron together. Because this identified as wabi-sabi-like and appreciated as so, it is treated with the care and respect that all things wabi-sabi are. A comparison with modernism. To get a better sense of what wabi-sabi is and isn't, it might be helpful to compare and contrast it with modernism, the dominant aesthetic sensibility of mid to late 20th century international industrialized society. Modernism is another slippery term that cuts a wide swath across art and design history, attitudes, and philosophy. Here we will describe middle modernism, the kind of modernism embodied in most of the pieces of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Middle modernism includes most of the slick, minimalist appliances, machines, automobiles, and gadgets produced since the Second World War. It also includes concrete, steel, and glass box buildings, of the sort that houses the Museum of Modern Art itself. Similarities. Both apply to all manner of man-made objects, spaces, and designs. Both are strong reactions against the dominant, established sensibilities of their time. Modernism was a radical departure from 19th century classicism and eclecticism. Wabi-Sabi was a radical departure from the Chinese perfection and gorgeousness of the 16th century and earlier. Both eschew any decoration that is not integral to structure. Both are abstract.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?